What if the war you think you know was only half the story? Beneath the headlines and battle maps were missions so disturbing, so deeply buried, they were erased from history, on purpose. These are the secrets nations swore never to speak of again. What you're about to hear was never meant to surface. And once you know, you can't unknow. The forest of Romanton, thick with pine and shadow, was once a favorite hunting ground of Prussian kings. But in the final winter of the war, its silence broke not with birdsong or antlers clashing, but with the distant bark of gunfire and the rumble of boots against frozen soil. It was in these woods that a ragtag band of partisans, known only as Wolfschers, carved out a rebellion few would ever know about. Their story lived not in headlines, but in whispers, smuggled letters, and the fading scars of survivors. At the heart of the group was Anya Kowalczyk, a 17-year-old from Suwałki, whose family had been deported when the Germans annexed the Polish corridor. Her father, a railway engineer turned courier for the resistance, was executed in 1942. Anya escaped, making her way into the forests with a pistol stolen from a German officer's coat left drying near a riverbank. She didn't know how to fire it then. She learned quickly. Wolfschers wasn't a unit in the traditional sense. It was a convergence. Former Red Army stragglers who refused surrender. Escaped Jewish families. Lithuanian woodsmen hardened by years of Soviet occupation. Even a handful of German deserters. Men like Oberstfreiter Rolf Berger, who had witnessed the slaughter of a Belarusian village and walked away from his post, never looking back. Their camps were mobile, their cells no larger than a dozen people. A pine needle bed, snow-covered logs for watchposts, and tarpaulin tents stitched together from SS uniforms. Supplies came rarely and in desperation, from raided depots, bribed villagers, or Allied airdrops coordinated through radio operators like Yuri Antonov, who had once transmitted weather forecasts for a Soviet bomber division. Now he broadcast encrypted messages to London, his antenna hidden inside a hollow birch tree. In January 1945, as the Red Army advanced westward, chaos swept East Prussia. Wehrmacht units pulled back to reinforce Königsberg, while SS death squads combed the countryside for defectors and survivors of the failed July 20th plot. For Wolfschers, this vacuum presented both danger and opportunity. Their most daring act came on the night of February 14th, code-named Operation Grey Lantern. Intelligence had revealed a supply train carrying V-2 rocket parts destined for a hidden research facility near Rassenberg. Anya led the infiltration squad, disguised in bloodied German winter uniforms scavenged from a downed convoy. With only Molotovs, handguns, and stolen bolt-action rifles, they ambushed the train at a narrow mountain pass. The attack was swift, brutal. Explosives planted on the tracks forced the engine off its rails, and gunfire erupted like thunder between the cliffs. In the chaos, Rolf Berger climbed into the rear car and detonated the oxygen tanks manually, engulfing the rocket fuel in fire. That explosion lit the forest like daybreak, and by morning, all that remained of the train was twisted iron and scorched snow. But not all missions ended in fire. Sometimes survival meant patience. Quiet. Hiding beneath frozen riverbanks, holding breaths for minutes at a time. Feeding on boiled moss, rat stew, and, on the worst days, sawdust bread. Anya once went 12 days without speaking a word, her tongue swollen from frostbite, after nearly being caught while retrieving airdropped medical supplies. Her silence became legend. They began calling her the White Fox. In March, a small miracle occurred. An Allied courier plane, dodging Luftwaffe patrols, managed to parachute crates marked with British flags, Lee Enfield rifles, rations, even chocolate. But the real treasure was a box of coded documents and a broken radio set, evidence that the Allies were finally aware of Wolfschers. With it came recognition and responsibility. Word of the Partisans spread. Small resistance bands from nearby forests joined, swelling their numbers to nearly 200. With this came problems, more mouths to feed, differing loyalties, old grudges between Polish and Lithuanian factions. Tensions threatened to tear them apart faster than bullets ever could. At one point, a knife fight nearly broke out over an intercepted German radio message, one group believing it was a trap, another insisting it was a call for an armistice. Anya, though only a teenager, stepped forward and demanded a tribunal, a forest council, held beneath the ancient oaks. There, in the freezing twilight, she made a plea not for unity, but for vengeance. Not rage, but memory. She read from her father's last letter. "We are not to become what they are. Let our names be cursed if we ever make monsters of ourselves." Her voice cracked with frost and grief. No one argued again. By April, the Soviet push had turned East Prussia into a wasteland of retreating troops, burning villages, and mass graves. Wolfschurz's final act was not a battle, but a liberation. In a forest gulag hastily abandoned by retreating SS officers, they found 61 prisoners: Poles, Jews, Russians, and even a captured RAF pilot. Emaciated, some unable to walk, they were brought to the forest camp and nursed back with broth and melted snow. On May 1, 1945, as Berlin fell, Anya and the remaining partisans lit a signal fire atop the ruined bell tower of a nearby village. Hours later, a Soviet reconnaissance unit arrived. The soldiers were stunned to see German uniforms worn by armed women and men guarding civilians instead of shooting them. For a moment, no one fired. Then someone laughed. Then someone cried. In the post-war chaos, Wolfschurz disbanded. Some were absorbed into the Red Army. Others disappeared, returning to what homes remained, or fleeing westward to avoid Soviet retribution. Rolf Berger was captured by the NKVD and vanished into the gulags. Yuri Antonov became a voice on Radio Moscow, but never spoke of the birch tree antenna. Anya Kowalczyk was never seen again. Some say she died in 1946 in a border skirmish near Kaliningrad. Others say she made it to Sweden, living under a new name. But in 1992, an elderly man walking near the ruins of Romanton found a rusted pistol buried beneath a stone marked only with a carved wolf's head. The forest had remembered, even if the world did not. In the smoky dusk of a ruined city, amid the gutted tenements and scorched streets of Nazi-occupied Warsaw, a secret passed hands in silence. It was January 1944, and the Polish capital was a cauldron of fear and resistance, where every brick seemed to whisper of betrayal and death. Deep beneath the ghetto's shattered walls, hidden in a tunnel once used to smuggle arms, British SOE agent Eleanor Marston received what could have been the most dangerous cipher ever recovered, Enigma X. It had been handed to her by a dying Polish courier named Marek Nowicki, shot in the gut by an SS patrol just blocks from Pawyak prison. He bled out with the machine cradled in his arms like a newborn. Eleanor, code-named Nightglass by London, wasn't supposed to be in Warsaw. Her original assignment was Prague, but an intercepted Abwehr message forced a mid-mission diversion. She parachuted into a cemetery outside the city under cover of a false funeral procession, her coffin hiding her radio equipment and cyanide capsule. Enigma X was unlike any version MI6 had encountered. Instead of the standard 3 rotors, it had 4. The fourth was inscribed not with letters, but with a strange series of alphanumeric runes, reminiscent of Slavic glyphs. According to Marek's last words, the machine had been taken from a German research post in Lublin during a raid by the Armia Krajowa, the Polish Home Army. But it wasn't just the machine that mattered, it was the notebook hidden beneath it, bound in cracked leather, filled with complex substitutions and Roman numerals arranged like Gregorian chants. Eleanor transmitted fragments back to Bletchley Park using a narrowband frequency to avoid Gestapo triangulation. Her handler, known only as Falcon, decoded a portion and confirmed the nightmare. Someone inside Bletchley was leaking decryption keys to the Abwehr. The trail led back to a name: Captain Thomas Elridge, a rising crypt analyst in Hut 6, praised for his work on Luftwaffe traffic. Elridge was eccentric, brilliant, and recently transferred to a liaison role between MI6 and the U.S. Office of Strategic Services. But there was more. In a top-secret transcript recovered from German signals traffic, he appeared under the codename Eberhard, and his last communication warned of a wild card in Warsaw, presumably Eleanor. Now hunted by both the Gestapo and a traitor within her own intelligence circles, Eleanor made contact with her Polish ally, Jakub Laska, a mathematician turned resistance fighter. Laska's family had perished in the ghetto uprising the year before, and he now ran a clandestine printing press posing as a cigarette factory. He understood the cipher's complexity immediately and recognized the fourth rotor's pattern. It mirrored an old Russian diplomatic code from 1905, likely revived by German cryptologists to fool Allied decoders. The Enigma X could not be cracked with brute force. It required intuition, music, poetry. Laska spoke of counterpoint and fugues, likening the encryption to a Bach concerto. Together, he and Eleanor spent nights beneath candlelight, layering symbols over maps, comparing battlefronts to arpeggios. The breakthrough came with a single word, Narvik, the site of a failed German invasion in Norway. The rotor's glyphs aligned only when Narvik was input as the base key. This discovery revealed a list of Allied convoys in the North Atlantic, their schedules and shipping manifests. If genuine, hundreds of lives were at risk. But more alarming was the message buried beneath the surface. Coordinates pointing to a safe house in Warsaw, an address long used by resistance couriers. When Eleanor and Jakub arrived, they found the place burned to the ground. The only thing left intact was a metal nameplate, scorched black, engraved with the initials T.E. Elridge had been in Warsaw. London refused to believe it. A man like Elridge couldn't have been in German-occupied territory without anyone noticing, unless he'd been there under protection. Unless the British weren't the only ones managing double agents. Eleanor sent a final encrypted burst to Bletchley and prepared to flee the city. But before she could reach the escape corridor through the sewers, her radio operator was captured. Jakub risked everything to warn her, guiding her through the labyrinth beneath the city using old architectural plans and chalk markings left by Jewish smugglers. They emerged days later, weak from gas and rot, in a forest clearing 10 miles from the Vistula River. Waiting for them was a German patrol. Jakub was shot instantly. Eleanor managed to kill one soldier before taking a bullet to the leg. Crawling through the snow, she activated a failsafe on the Enigma X, a thermite charge embedded beneath the keypad. The machine melted in seconds, its secrets lost in ash. She awoke days later in a safe house near Krakow, rescued by a splinter unit of the Armia Ludowa. She was never the same. The bullet lodged in her thigh would leave her limping for life. But she carried with her a final message, burned into memory. Elridge was not working for the Germans. He was working for himself. The war ended the following year. Elridge vanished, never seen again in the UK. Some say he boarded a submarine to Argentina. Others believe he was silenced by MI6 to preserve the fragile unity of Allied victory. Eleanor was awarded the King's Medal for courage, though her role in Warsaw remained classified. In 1967, a declassified memo surfaced, referencing an Operation Ghostlight, a post-war program hunting Allied defectors suspected of war profiteering and espionage. One name appeared redacted throughout, but in the margin of a single page, scrawled in faded pencil, were 2 letters, T.E. Today, beneath the reconstructed buildings of modern Warsaw, the tunnels used by Eleanor and Jakub still exist. A small plaque near the Walla district commemorates unknown partisans who died fighting the invisible war, one not of bombs and bullets, but of symbols, silence, and shadows. The city that refused to fall lay in a frostbitten tomb. For 872 days, Leningrad endured starvation, shellfire, and the grinding clamp of the German siege. Bodies froze where they fell, horses were devoured in desperation, and children clutched their ribs as if to keep their organs from failing. But deep beneath the snow-choked streets and rubble-strewn avenues, another war unfolded, one of wavelengths, wires, and whispered code. It was fought not with tanks, but with silence. And it was led by a deaf boy named Alexei Morozov. He was only 15 when the Germans first encircled the city in September 1941. His father, a naval radio technician, had been killed during the evacuation of the Baltic Fleet. His mother died the following winter, succumbing to hunger after giving her bread ration to her son. Alone and partially deaf from a childhood illness, Alexei survived by scavenging and sleeping in ventilation shafts beneath the Hermitage Museum. His life changed when he followed a pair of uniformed men into an underground metro tunnel. He thought they were deserters. They were not. They were technicians from the NKVD's Radio Intelligence Division, operating an unauthorized listening post known only as Cell 53. Leningrad's official communications had been bombed to ruin in the first weeks of the siege. What remained was this network of makeshift stations, radios wired into old tramlines, powered by scavenged batteries, and hidden in the bowels of metro stations no longer in use. The men were about to abandon the post when they noticed Alexei watching them. He couldn't speak, could barely hear, but he understood Morse code. His father had taught it to him as a game, tapping messages on the walls of their apartment. Alexei responded to one of the technicians, Lieutenant Mikhail Turgenev, by tapping back a series of precise dots and dashes with a metal spoon. Stunned, Turgenev tested him with increasingly complex sequences. Alexei responded faster than any machine they had. He was taken in. Given a cot, scraps of preserved meat, and a roll. His silence became an asset. By late 1942, Alexei was the primary translator of German field transmissions intercepted on a salvaged Wehrmacht receiver. He didn't need headphones, he read the vibrations through touch and teeth, placing his fingers on the metal coils and wires, letting the hum of code pulse through his skin like music. One night in January 1943, he picked up a pattern he'd never encountered before. At first, it appeared to be random interference. But the rhythm felt deliberate, structured. It repeated every 7 minutes. When he relayed this to Turgenev, the older man dismissed it as signal bleed. Alexei insisted. He tapped out the entire sequence, 5 pages worth. After cross-referencing with previous intercepts, they realized it was a transmission from inside Leningrad. Someone in the city was sending encrypted messages to German artillery units outside the siege ring. It was unthinkable. Treason in a starving city was a death sentence. But Cell 53 verified the source. The signal originated from an abandoned post office near the Kirovsky district, long thought destroyed. A Soviet spotter plane confirmed the location was still intact, windows boarded, chimney cold, no visible movement. On February 2nd, under cover of darkness and snowfall, a 5-man NKVD unit breached the building. Inside they found a makeshift radio set hidden beneath a pile of children's books. The transmitter was warm, but the operator was gone. They had escaped through the sewer system just minutes earlier. Alexei, devastated by the near miss, insisted on setting a trap. He worked with Turgenev and a cryptanalyst named Irina Polikarpova to forge a new message mimicking the traitor's transmission. It was a false artillery request, coordinates that would lure a German battery to fire on what they believed was a Red Army supply depot. Instead, the coordinates targeted an open field, where Soviet counter-battery teams were waiting with Katyusha rocket trucks. It worked. The German guns fired first, revealing their position. Within seconds, the field lit up in streaks of white fire as the Soviet barrage crushed the hidden artillery nest. When the real traitor tried to transmit again, the Cell 53 team traced the signal's origin within 30 seconds. He was caught 2 days later, hiding in the crypt of a bombed cathedral. He wasn't German. He was a Soviet officer, Major Anton Rudenko, believed dead since 1941, now working with the Abwehr in exchange for food and safe passage for his mistress. He was executed without trial. But the event shook Cell 53. If someone like Rudenko could be turned, how many more were out there? Alexei's silence grew deeper. He refused to speak, even when spoken to. He focused entirely on code. Every intercepted message passed through his hands. He began to notice patterns others didn't, slight hesitations in German phrasing, odd punctuation, double letters. He theorized that the Wehrmacht was using more than Morse. They were layering code into the cadence itself, a secondary encryption embedded in the rhythm. Irina believed him. Together, they worked for weeks decoding the pulses and pauses. In April 1943, they broke a message hidden in this rhythm. Operation Icekling, Ice Blade. It outlined a planned sabotage of Leningrad's thawing water lines, an attempt to poison the city's scarce drinking reserves with industrial chemicals. The NKVD acted swiftly, securing the pipelines and arresting a German infiltrator posing as a sanitation worker. The plot was stopped. Over 30,000 civilians would have died had it succeeded. By the end of the siege in January 1944, Cell 53 was credited with over 170 confirmed interceptions and 3 foiled operations. But their records were sealed, and most of their names redacted. Officially, they did not exist. Alexei Morozov was never decorated. He vanished from public records in 1946. Some say he joined a Cold War listening post in Siberia. Others believe he died in a psychiatric hospital, unable to cope with the world after silence. But in the Museum of the Siege in St. Petersburg, there is an unlabeled piece of equipment, a rusted field radio with a worn piece of cloth wrapped around its handle. If you press your ear to the metal, some claim you can still feel the pulse, the rhythm, the heartbeat of a boy who saved a dying city not with bullets, but with fingers, silence, and code. On the bitter morning of February 15, 1945, in the frozen wasteland of eastern Pomerania, a convoy of German half-tracks carved deep wounds into the snow. Operation Solstice, Hitler's final armored counteroffensive on the Eastern Front, had begun. It was meant to break the Soviet encirclement of Kustrin and delay the Red Army's march to Berlin. But buried within this doomed assault was something darker, something not recorded in official war diaries or post-war memoirs. It was called the 12th Penal Battalion, though its designation was known only to a handful of high-ranking officers in the SS and Wehrmacht. It did not appear on maps. Its men wore no insignia, and none of them expected to return. The 12th was formed in secrecy from the remnants of the Dirlewanger Brigade and condemned POWs, soldiers disgraced, court-martialed, or forgotten, murderers, deserters, foreign conscripts from occupied lands. But unlike other penal units thrown into hopeless assaults, the 12th had a single cryptic order: reach Zeelandzig and secure the manuscript. That name, the manuscript, meant nothing to most of them. Only one man understood its weight: Untersturmführer Karl Weiss, a failed academic turned SS intelligence officer. Before the war, Weiss had studied medieval occult texts in Munich, considered eccentric even among Nazi mystics. But his obsession with the manuscript had made him valuable to Himmler's Ahnenerbe, the Nazi archaeological and occult division. According to Weiss, the manuscript was an ancient text hidden beneath the ruins of a 14th-century monastery outside Zeelandzig, once belonging to the Teutonic Knights. It was said to contain esoteric knowledge on celestial alignments and energy manipulation, what Himmler believed could unlock secret power over matter and time. Hitler dismissed it as nonsense. But as the Soviets closed in and Berlin faced annihilation, even madness seemed worth a final wager. The battalion's trek began with 212 men. By the time they reached the monastery, only 54 remained. They had been shelled, ambushed by partisans, and strafed by Yak fighters. Bodies froze where they fell, stacked along roadside ditches like forgotten statues. Zeelandzig itself was a ghost town, bombed out and burning. But beneath the monastery ruins, hidden by decades of ash and rot, they found a sealed crypt reinforced with rusted iron and concrete poured during the Great War. Inside, a small vault, untouched for centuries. They forced it open. What they found was not a book, but a cube. Black, obsidian, smooth as water. Inset with bronze filigree depicting astrological charts and alchemical runes. It vibrated faintly, almost imperceptibly, when touched. Weiss wept. He claimed it had once belonged to John Dee, the Elizabethan occultist and mathematician, stolen from Prague during the 30 Years' War. But as they prepared to transport it back to Kustrin, the ground shook. Not from the cube, but from Soviet artillery. The Red Army had caught up. What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. Soviet T-34s rolled over snowbanks like steel predators. The battalion's few remaining Panzerfausts were ineffective in the narrow monastery courtyard. By nightfall, only 3 members of the 12th remained alive: Weiss, Corporal Anton Frank, a convicted arsonist, and Private Istvan Drobny, a Czech conscript who had twice tried to escape. They escaped through a tunnel beneath the altar, used in the 1600s to smuggle relics during religious purges. The cube, too large to carry, had to be left behind. But Weiss couldn't accept this. He insisted on returning, raving that it was a key, not an object. Frank refused. They fought. Gunshots echoed through the catacombs. Drobny ran. Only Drobny survived. He turned himself in to the Soviets 3 days later, hands raised, uniform in tatters. When interrogated by SMERSH, he told them everything. The battalion. The manuscript. The cube. They thought him mad. But the coordinates he gave matched an abandoned Nazi outpost near the ruins. Soviet intelligence dispatched a recovery team. They found the monastery in ruins, its crypt collapsed. No cube. No Weiss. Just ashes and twisted metal. Years later, in 1961, a KGB file surfaced in a declassified trove detailing the interrogation of a former SS officer captured in Argentina. In it, a name appeared. Weiss. According to the transcript, Weiss had survived and spent the post-war years working in South America on esoteric energy research funded by an unnamed Western intelligence agency. That same year, an unexplained seismic event was recorded in a remote area near Bariloche, an Argentine town known for its community of ex-Nazis and scientists. Witnesses claimed to see blue lightning arcs in the sky, followed by a deafening hum and a complete local blackout. Officially, the manuscript, or the cube, was never recovered. Anton Frank's body was discovered in the ruins of the monastery in 1957 by Polish reconstruction workers. A rusted Luger lay nearby. Carved into the stone wall in crude letters were the words, "Time eats truth." Today, the monastery site is a historical reserve, but the crypt remains closed by order of the Polish Ministry of Culture. Unofficially, visitors report strange electromagnetic interference near the ruins. Phones die, compasses spin. Private Istvan Drobny disappeared in 1948. Last seen boarding a train to Brno. His name never appeared in Soviet records again. The 12th Battalion was never officially acknowledged. No medals. No unit citations. No graves. But in a warehouse outside Moscow, locked behind vault doors labeled anomalous, lies a box catalogued only as Item 088R. Inside, fragments of bronze, obsidian dust, and a journal page stained with blood. Its final sentence reads, Asterisk, it was not meant for this world. Asterisk. Her code name was Aurora. Real name, Genevieve Arnaud. To most, she was a seamstress from Caen, a city nestled in the heart of Normandy. But by 1944, she was one of the most vital assets in the French resistance, an agent whose messages had helped cripple German supply routes, destroy ammunition depots, and map troop movements with the precision of a general. Yet her most dangerous mission came not with a gun, but with a single sheet of paper, asterisk the Crimson Directive asterisk, an order so sensitive it never passed through a radio, never touched Morse code. It had to be delivered by hand, and Genevieve was the only one trusted to carry it. The directive's contents remain classified even today in several archives. What is known, from surviving fragments and testimonies, is this. It was a joint Allied resistance contingency plan for the failure of Operation Overlord. If the beaches at Normandy fell, if the landings were repelled, the directive would initiate a scorched earth uprising across northern France. Bridges, roads, fuel stores, and communication lines would be destroyed en masse. The goal was not just to frustrate the German war machine, it was to make occupied France utterly unusable for a counterattack. It was a plan born of desperation, written in London and approved by de Gaulle, Eisenhower, and Churchill himself. It had to be delivered to the leaders of the major Maquis cells just days before the landings. Genevieve was chosen for one reason: she had never been caught. At 32, she was calm, sharp, and relentless. Her brother had been hanged by the Gestapo in 1942. Her fiancé died in North Africa. She had nothing left but France and the fight. She knew the forests, the roads, the trains that still ran. She could change accents like a stage actress. Her cover identity for the mission, a grief-stricken widow traveling from Caen to Dijon to bury her mother's ashes. Her only luggage, a hatbox containing the urn. The directive was folded into a false bottom beneath the ashes. A hidden flap held microfilm versions for redundancy. She left Caen on the night of June 2, 1944. The journey should have taken 12 hours. It took 62. First, her train was stopped outside Alesa. German inspections had increased due to rumors of invasion. SS officers pulled men off the cars seemingly at random. Genevieve remained calm, weeping quietly when questioned, producing forged documents so convincing that the German corporal apologized. By June 3, she'd switched trains at Le Mans. A courier passed her a coded slip: "Ravens have flown east." The code confirmed the invasion was still scheduled for June 5. But by then, rumors of bad weather were circulating. She feared a delay, or worse, a cancellation. At Tours, disaster struck. A Gestapo agent named Otto Reinhardt boarded the train. He wasn't just feared, he was infamous. Known among resistance circles as the Leech, Reinhardt specialized in infiltration and psychological torture. He sat 3 rows from her. At the next stop, 2 Maquis operatives were dragged off. She didn't flinch. But she knew, if Reinhardt had even a hint of her identity, she would not survive interrogation. She made a decision no one expected. At the next station, she abandoned the train. It was suicidal. Allied airdrops had not yet begun. Her only path to Dijon was overland, through woods and back roads, with no supplies and only a revolver in her coat lining. She walked 20 kilometers that night, cutting through ravines and farmland. Twice she avoided patrols. Once, she pretended to be a mute when questioned by a passing German cyclist. By June 4, she reached a safe house near Montbard, a bakery run by a resistance sympathizer named François Lemaitre. There, she learned the storm over the English Channel had forced a delay. D-Day was moved to June 6. She had 2 days. The final leg was the most dangerous. The region around Dijon was crawling with German logistics officers preparing for troop redeployment. The Crimson Directive had to reach Colonel Paul Duret of the Côte d'Or resistance cell by midnight on June 5. If the landings failed, his cell would destroy 3 rail hubs and a critical Luftwaffe refueling station. Without the directive, they would do nothing, waiting instead for word that might never come. Genevieve reached Dijon at dusk on June 5. But Duret wasn't at the rendezvous point. She waited in the shadows of a wine cellar for 2 hours. Finally, a young boy arrived, a messenger. Duret had been captured earlier that day in a raid. His second-in-command, Captain Sylvain Roche, would meet her instead. She handed over the hatbox. Roche opened the false bottom, extracted the directive, and burned the microfilm. He read it in silence, then looked at her with something between admiration and horror. "You know," he said, "if this is used, we will burn half of France." Genevieve nodded. "Only if it keeps the rest free." The invasion came the next morning. Operation Overlord was a success. The directive was never activated. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, as the Allies pushed inland, Reinhardt returned to Dijon. He had traced the escapee from the train, cross-referenced with witness reports, and deduced Genevieve's true identity. On June 20th, she was arrested in Caen. For 3 days, she was interrogated. She said nothing. On the 4th day, as SS guards prepared to move her to Paris for enhanced methods, the prison was bombed during an Allied air raid. Genevieve escaped in the chaos, crawling through smoke and bodies, limping 3 kilometers on a broken foot. She joined the resistance in Lyon and continued to fight until the liberation of Paris. After the war, she received no medals, no parades. The Crimson Directive remained classified for decades. But she lived quietly in a small village outside Toulouse, running a school for girls. She died in 1981, with no known children. At her funeral, a man with an American accent left a folded French flag on her coffin. No one knew who he was. Today, in a vault beneath the Musée de la Résistance in Lyon, a scorched paper rests inside a sealed box. Faded ink, red as dried blood, marks its header. Asterisk, Directive C, Crimson. In event of Allied failure, initiate total resistance. Code word, Cendres. Asterisk, ashes. Some secrets were buried to protect nations. Others, to hide the unspeakable. These stories didn't fade, they were silenced. But now they've resurfaced, and the silence is broken. The question is, what else was erased? And how much of history is still locked away, waiting to be opened? Be careful what you uncover. Some truths were never meant to be found.